This is Business Time with Taps and Weaver, sponsored by Lawyer Fair, the legal comparison service for business owners, and Pension Playpen, restoring confidence in pensions.
Special. I don't know why I didn't do it sooner, to be perfectly honest, but...
Absolutely. Well, funnily enough, my youngest son, he was out and about, so I didn't hear from him. But it was... last year was the funniest thing. My youngest, he on Facebook on Father's Day, he lives in Bristol. He posted a photograph of a Father's Day card and a stamp, which he took in Smith's in Bristol, and then he said, "If I wasn't a student and if you ever paid me an allowance so I could live, this is what I would have bought you and posted you. But as you don't, I can't. Can I have 20 quid, please?"
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Well, listen, I think we are properly recording. I've got a man in the basement flat somewhere in Walthamstow who edits these for me, Paul. But so Juliana will probably be telling me now we are properly recording. So welcome to Business and Beef. This is the little podcast with a lot of beef. And our special guest on today's recording is not only a top man who has trundled his way into London on the jalopy from the deepest parts of Kent, but Paul Andrews, who has come in and is a host, amongst many other things, which we're going to cover, but is a host on Business Bunker. Well, welcome, Paul, to Turning the Tables on You.
Thank you, Andrew. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Not at all. And Paul has been very kind to invite me and the Lawyer Fair team down to the Business Bunker. But we're going to go into that in more detail. But I am loving the fact that Paul, who normally is this brilliant presenter on this show, which down in Kent, I'm sitting here now interviewing him, and I'm feeling almost powerful, Paul.
Yeah,
I feel as though I can actually now dictate the terms,
yeah.
having previously sat rather sweatily on the other side of the fence.
Absolutely.
So, Paul, thank you for coming up. And one of the reasons that I've asked you to come along and join us really is you've got a great track record. I mean, you are a man with a fantastic track record of entrepreneurship. I mean, I've just printed off some information here. I mean, the organisations you're involved in, the baubles you've won. I mean, Entrepreneur of the Year, Kent Invicta Chair 2009, New Business of the Year, winning Best Regional Website. It's endless. My old mate Henry, who sadly isn't here because he's stuck in Austria watching the Grand Prix, who also enjoys his baubles, would have been able to compare baubles with you. So
absolutely.
Give me a little bit of background to Paul Andrews. Where have you come from? What are you doing?
Oh, blimey. Where would you like me to start, Andrew? I'm knocking on a bit now, so I've been around a long time.
Yeah.
And I've done lots of things. And early in my career, I had a corporate career for quite a long time as well, before I went into entrepreneurial mode. So where do you want to start? I left school when I was 14, if you want to go that far back.
I'll tell you what I'm going to do for you, and to give you a bit of a prime here. Business Bunker.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about that and maybe work backwards from there.
Yeah, I think you may find this interesting based on a conversation we were having at another point. 7 years ago now, having recently won Kent Entrepreneur of the Year, I was invited to take part in a radio show, something I'd never done before, on the BBC.
Wow.
And I got a phone call late one Sunday evening saying, "Would you come on to the early morning show tomorrow morning live? We'd like to talk about business." And I thought, "Oh yeah, I'd like to do that. That would be really great." So I got up at the crack of dawn and I trundled my way over to the radio station and I sat down to go live on air. And they said, "Okay, Paul, did you see The Apprentice last night?" And I said, "No, I never watch it." And they said, "Well, that's what we're talking about this morning." I went, "I thought we were talking about business." And they said, "Well, yeah, The Apprentice." And I got a bit annoyed, to be frank, on live radio. And I went, "I think you're confusing reality TV with life, because The Apprentice bears no relationship to running a real business." And the presenter tried to present an argument that said, "No, it does. It was indicative." And I just, that is fairly typical of the media's approach to small business. You just look at things superficially without thinking about it. There is no way anyone in a business could walk up to someone and say, "You're fired." It doesn't happen. You'd be in a tribunal sooner than your feet could touch the ground. That's just not how business works anymore, and I probably doubt it hasn't worked like that for 100 years. And I went into a bit of a rant about how poor business coverage is in the United Kingdom, that when it is covered, it's normally covered either at a macroeconomic level, a multinational level, or some kind of nonsense story about tax avoidance or something. Very rarely is it positively covered. And I said, as this was on a local BBC radio station, and I said, as a local station, do you not know that there are 60,000 small businesses in your area? Because you never mention them. And they kind of went, and to be fair, at the end of the interview, the lady that was interviewing me said, well, that's Paul Andrews, being a bit controversial, because what I said to them is, you ought to have a radio show for small businesses. And she said, that's Paul Andrews, been a bit controversial. If you think there's any call for a small business radio show, maybe let us know. And when I came out, I was really quite angry, because I just get fed up with the way that the media treat business. And to some extent, that's got worse over the last few years. We've become a very anti-business kind of society for the last few years, because we always focus on silliness, tax avoidance, because tax avoidance doesn't mean anything. Every single human being on the planet avoids their tax. If you've got an ISA, you've just avoided tax. Tax evasion is a crime, and that's a completely different issue.
Yeah.
But that seems to be the only thing people ever talk about. Whereas most small businesses are run by women and men that are just trying to make a living, and there are 5.2 million small businesses in the United Kingdom. 4 million of them have one employee, but 60% of all employment in the UK is with small businesses. 70% of our GDP and heading upwards is small businesses. So basically, I got a bit annoyed. I run a few social media groups on LinkedIn and what have you, and I posted on there, I've just been on this show, they don't reckon there's room for a small business show, what do you think? If you think you'd like one, you maybe would like to email the BBC. And a few days later I got an email from them saying, take my email address off of your LinkedIn page now. I've had 5,000 emails. So I said, well, there you go. There's a need for this. And they said, well, no, it's not the kind of thing we'd like to do. So I was walking around moaning about this, and everybody said, well, you're supposed to be an entrepreneur, start your own. So that's what I did. With no experience of ever, that was my one and only experience of ever being on radio, was as a guest for half an hour on a show. So I thought, I'll start a radio show, and I tried to find somewhere to put it on. As it happened, I had one or two contacts that worked in commercial radio, and I called them up and said, I want to do a business show on the radio, and they all said to me, no, it never worked. In the UK it doesn't work. And one of them said, because many years ago I lived and worked in the States, and there's wall-to-wall shows like that in the States. And I said, well, it works in the US. And one of them said, funnily enough, I used to work on a business talk radio show in the US, millions of listeners, never worked in the UK though. And everybody kept telling me it will never work. Well, I love that. The minute somebody tells me it won't work, I'm in there.
How many shows later are we into?
Oh, I don't know, 7 years now. Over 500 shows now.
Is that right? 500 shows.
So I kind of put that onto bed eventually.
Well, let me tell you, I was saying to Paul before, actually, he's been very, very kind to invite me down a couple of times. But I would say that if you are looking at what a local business radio station should be about, the service and the quality of it, then Business Bunker, which, by the way, you can listen to even if you're not in Kent.
Absolutely.
It's available all around the world. I think, in fact, your co-host gets tweets from various places around the world.
Jules, who's my lovely co-host and as mad as bat, she has a little fan club that are spread all over the world, from Maryland in the USA to Turkey, to the mountains of Turkey. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'd like to, it really is a brilliant local show, I have to say, and again, I think if anybody's thinking about it, and it's something I've thought about as well myself, privately actually, I thought, but I have to say I'd hold Business Bunker up as a great example, and it's, I think, also another example to me, Paul. Lawyer Fair is aiming to be an online service. That's what we're trying to be, but actually, in building the foundations of it, it's very local. We are doing lots of local networking and local conversations, and that's why I came down and thoroughly enjoyed it. And I think that no matter how big and global the world becomes, small business is about local community issues.
It is.
Isn't it?
It absolutely it is. But there's kind of two things, and as the show has evolved, we've kind of grown with it, and that's another thing from my background. I'm a massive believer in evolution, and how things grow, evolve, and you adapt to the scenario around you. When I first started the Business Bunker, I called it Kent Business Radio and the Business Bunker Show because I first started broadcasting on a small FM station in Kent, and it didn't have any reach anywhere else. But very quickly I realised there was an opportunity to expand it by adopting internet broadcasting. And at that point is when the station that I was broadcasting on and I parted ways, because the people running that station were old school radio, and it was all that will never work. Why nobody will ever listen to that, and very locked into how it's always been. Oh, we tried that once in 1948 and it didn't work, so we're never going to try it again. So I actually started my own radio station. And went entirely onto the internet as a broadcast platform. That opened it up. And although we're still called Kent Business Radio, our listenership certainly extends beyond Kent now into the surrounding counties in terms of in-depth. Yeah. But as you intimated, we have a lot of listeners spread around the world. And funnily enough, on the back of what we were doing, Jules and I, the Wednesday before last, actually were on a radio show, a business radio show in New York.
Oh, brilliant.
They'd heard us, they invited onto their show, and we were just comparing notes about business and stuff like that. So it shows you how quickly things can grow. I'm a great believer in local, but more than that, I'm a great believer in independence and small. And I do a whole talk about a paradigm shift that I see unfolding before us, which is, if you start to look around, large institutions, large organisations are all failing. If you look at political parties, they've hemorrhaged members. If you look at trade unions, they've hemorrhaged members. If you look at the European Union, it's in big trouble financially. If you look at huge corporations, pharmaceutical companies that once upon a time were dependent on their bigness and now no longer able to function because of their bigness. And all kinds of organisations are fracturing because they're too big. And the classic example of that is the 2007-8 financial crisis, where organisations like RBS over-capacitised what they did, became too large, couldn't manage, and still today, well, last week they had another problem. They had problems interfacing all their legacy systems because an organisation like RBS is just a mishmash of hundreds almost of incompatible businesses that have been bolted together to make one giant business that doesn't work. And you see that right across the board. And my big vision here is, it is about local, lots of things are about local, but it's also about, so it's community, but it's also about community of interest. And it's one of the great things about digital and the internet is you can build communities of interest, or as Seth Godin calls them, tribes. So, you know, if someone in Australia and I and someone in Iceland has an interest in, I don't know, left-footed garden planting tarantula keepers, you could probably find an audience in the world.
That was the subject of show 365.
Yeah, it was actually, funny enough. I'm glad you remembered that.
I listened to every one of them, Paul, obviously.
Absolutely. But you can put together an audience of interest because you have reach to whatever it is, 9 billion people, technically, around the world. And it's interesting when you start to look at that, how different demographics can be pulled together. But in general, still, from an economic point of view, 85% of GDP, economic growth, of economic activity in the UK is internal markets locally. And that's where it happens.
Well, look, I mean, I knew I'd have a problem inviting you in actually getting you to say anything, Paul. So, so I'm sorry this has been such a struggle. But I was chuckling to myself there when I heard you say paradigm shift, because I suspect your co-host would have interjected at that stage with reference to paradigm shift. But one of the things I wanted to pick up on what you've just said, which I think is absolutely right, the community of interest. Small business issues, frankly, are the same in Kent as they are in Melbourne, as they are in America. And I think one of the brilliant things about the reach of a show like yours, which I do genuinely think is beautifully put together. And I think that I was going to call it the tension, but it was the friendly tension between you and Jules. It's part of that, frankly. But the issues of the people that come on the show are universal in small business, and that's why I think shows like yours have a real power way beyond the local geographic boundaries that there's a bit of a mumble I was saying there, wasn't it? The local geography that you might be viewed as being recording to. Listen, that's brilliant. What's the furthest away, do you think, in the world that you've had a piece of correspondence on business banking? Maryland is pretty good.
No, we've had listeners in New Zealand.
All right.
Excuse me. That was the New Zealand one was a bit of a misnomer because it was a guest's mum.
Right. Still, you can put it on your publicity, can't you?
Absolutely.
Listeners in New Zealand.
Yeah, absolutely.
Best viewed, best listened to radio station in Auckland.
Absolutely, yeah. No, so we've had listeners, ad hoc listeners from all over the place.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Right around the world. If you look at a listener map in Google Analytics, there's things that pop up all over the place.
Oh, wow.
I can, not about my show, I can tell you quite an interesting story. My eldest son, Jamie, does a late night show on our
Does he
station.
demand 20 quid from you on Father's Day?
Well, he works with me now, so he demands actually a lot more money than that, sadly. But he does a late night music show of new and unsigned bands
Yes.
on the radio station.
Yeah.
And
Which is cool. What's the show called?
New Potatoes.
New Potatoes.
But it's spelt in the German way, N-E-U.
N-E-U, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
New Potatoes.
Yeah.
Play some cracking music on there. And I produced that show with him, but he's the main presenter of the show. And about a year, 18 months ago, we, like the Business Bunker, we interact via Twitter while we're live on air. And we were on air playing some music and stuff like that. And Jamie's a very interesting, knowledgeable man about music. He's a musician by training. And he talks about the production of music and things like that. Very whispering Bob Harris, if you're of that age. He was describing a track he was just about to play and describing the production quality of the track and starting to play the music. And we got a tweet, and the tweet said, "Oh, Jamie, that was a really good description of that track. What a glorious track. We all agreed that that's the best track tonight." And I thought, that's interesting, we all agreed. I wonder how many people are on the end of this listening. So I said, "Oh, thank you for that. Can I ask you how many of you were, when you say we, how many of you are listening?" And he came back and they said, "Well, there's about 30 of us here at the moment." Wow. I said, where are you? They said, "We're in a bar." So you've got us on in a bar, and where's the bar? They said, "The Andaman Islands."
No,
The
really?
where? I said, "The Andaman Islands." And I mean, you mean the islands just off the coast of Malaysia, between Malaysia and Indonesia? Yeah.
Wow, that's
And
fantastic.
that's insane.
Yeah.
I said, "And can I ask you how you found us?" And they went, "Oh yeah, Jim," or whatever his name was.
Yeah.
He heard you in a bar when he was on holiday.
Wow.
And I went, "Oh, fantastic. Where was that?" He said, "Papua New Guinea." And I went, "I'll give up now." And when we looked at the analytics, we found that Jamie had a huge listenership in Southeast Asia, Japan, and the west coast of America.
Wow.
And because we're a digital station, we suddenly realised that what we could do is we could repeat the programme in different time frames. So after we came off air, about 2 hours later, we repeated the programme again. So it was prime time on the west coast, Southeast Asia.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
And again, you build the listener base.
Yeah.
It was probably, there's no reason why the listenership was there. It just was.
Yeah,
So we kind of leveraged that to some extent.
Yeah.
So it's really...
Adam and I. That is awesome.
It's just bizarre, isn't it? It's just
Absolutely.
you couldn't set out with a plan to do that.
No.
And that's just the bizarreness of it all, really.
Yeah. But I think there's a really interesting extension of this conversation, Paul, into what businesses can do for themselves, actually, because the reach you're describing there, I mean, sorry to sound like, kind of Alan Partridge, kind of cliche, but the reach of the internet is so awesome. It can penetrate into market you would never imagine. And one of the things that Lawyer Fair is trying to do, and I know many others are, is podcasts and various other pieces of search equity collateral, I suppose. And I have to say, I think that I'm not sure that many businesses are clued into the opportunity of extending their reach just through a little bit of self-broadcasting.
Absolutely.
And we're sitting here with a bit of Audacity software kit and a nice, rather phallic-looking Rode microphone.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's it. That's all we're recording with.
Absolutely. It is actually but you've been there, so you've seen our studio. We have a full radio studio.
Absolutely.
But it is possible to set up a radio
professional.
studio. Yeah, almost. Yeah. And then Jules arrived.
Yeah, it's just the co-host who lets you down.
But it is possible to set up a radio station with an internet connection, a microphone, and a laptop. It's so easy to do now. Now, of course, and the overlap between radio broadcast and podcasting is quite narrow. But internet radio is growing in terms of its listener base. In the US, it's the second most popular route to listen to radio after satellite. but satellite is well established in the US. In the UK, internet radio listening is on a parallel with DAB, which worries the politicians no end, because the problem with radio in the UK, of course, is it's completely controlled by the government, and it's just out of date. The reason that we have very samey radio, if you leave aside the BBC and then look at everything else, it's mostly the same. Apart from one or two things like LBC or TalkSport, the rest of the radio spectrum in the UK, radio stations broadcasting pop music. And the reason for that is they're restricted geographically. They're trying to make money from advertising. The only way they can do that is to be middle of the road and not to offend as many people as possible. Whereas for people like us...
Which is offensive in itself.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas people like us on our radio station, we can afford to be completely random. So we have 40 or 50 shows, none of which have anything in common. Yeah, and the whole idea behind what we do as a broadcaster is you listen to the shows that interest you. You don't listen to the station. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
Go on, Paul, sorry. And that is quite synonymous with podcasts as well.
Yeah.
You know, so people have their favourite podcasts that they listen to on a regular basis, and they might come from radio. You know, so you can download podcasts from Radio 4. In the old days, people would have been a Radio 4 fan, and they would have had Radio 4 on all day so that they could catch the one or two programmes they like. People don't consume media like that any longer anyway. They consume what they want, when they want, on demand, and on different platforms. And I think radio, even though it's the first of the big consumer media platforms, still has the best future. It's still a really, really, really great medium, and by adding podcasting to it and all that kind of stuff, we're just driving it on and on, and the audiences are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but they're also getting smaller. And what I mean by that is, like in the old days of TV, when you had 2 TV channels, and you're probably not old enough to remember this, but when I was a kid, and
you're very kind.
We used to get home on a Friday night from school at 5 o'clock, and there was a TV programme called Crackerjack, and half the
Crackerjack pencil.
Absolutely, you got a Crackerjack pencil and all the rest of it. It's Friday, it's 5 o'clock, it's Crackerjack, and half the population of the UK would watch that TV programme. So they had audiences like 29 million. That will never happen with a TV programme again, because the choice is so wide. But also the platforms are different, the ways to listen. You know, you can watch a programme as it's broadcast live. You can watch it on Dave Plus One. You can watch it on UK Gold. You can watch it next week, tomorrow in a box set. You can record it. You can do all kinds of things with it. You can watch it on catch up. There are just a million ways to consume it. You can watch it on YouTube. So we've kind of fractured it from a mass audience, and although we have mass audiences, the numbers are different. That throws people, and it gives you some interesting logistics, and it also throws up some opportunities. Because as a business, Channel Radio, which is the radio station that Business Bunker is on now, we're a very fledgling radio station. We've been going just 3 years, and we've just started to generate a little bit of income. And we do that by we don't sell advertising per se. We sell sponsorship, because again, advertising doesn't work. The model's changed. The reason that radio worked in the past is you had access. So our local commercial radio stations have an audience of about 200,000 people. So if you wanted to advertise your furniture shop or your car dealership in the local area, great place to put an advert on the radio. 200,000 people would hear it. Those 200,000 people would include 5-year-olds and 90-year-olds. But it was one of those, you throw enough at a blanket, some of it will stick, and some of it will go in. If you then look at Channel Radio, we don't have an audience that big of the entire station, in a month. But what we have are demographic audiences. So we have a finance show, for instance. They have a few thousand listeners, It's not a huge amount, but every single one of them is interested in buying a pension or a mortgage or whatever, or a buy-to-let property.
Yeah.
So if you're in that marketplace, it's a perfect place to sponsor because you've got a dedicated audience.
Yeah, no, got it. Yeah, it's okay. There's a German family that have been in one of those London Eye bubbles are behind you, Paul, and they've already gone down 3 times. We're chatting about business bunker. So, I'm playing the role of Jules Sirkin. I'm here to kind of chaperone you through.
Well, you look very similar.
Thank you. I don't drink as much Prosecco as
nobody drinks as much Prosecco as Jules.
But listen, that's fascinating, and I think the ability to, and this goes back to my point actually about the ability for individual businesses, no matter how small, to actually create a niche following because people can find you now.
Yeah,
and the beauty between the change from the monopoly of the BBC or whatever it might have been in the old days, to the ability now to just anybody can broadcast is phenomenal.
Absolutely.
And podcasts are coming back in favour anyway as well.
Absolutely.
This recent programme on, is it called Serial?
Yeah.
Has made it. So I love the fact, I mean, from my personal perspective, I hardly watch anything now. It's all podcasts when I'm travelling. So.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree with you. Now listen, I need to get a little bit more about you because you've won these various awards. You've done so many even things, frankly. My list here is too long. I mean, what are the things that you've learned, Paul, in your journey? I mean, that's a very difficult question, which I haven't given you any time to prep on, by the way.
No, absolutely.
But are there some kind of key things you look back and think, might have done that slightly differently, etc., etc.?
Oh, mistakes I have made. Oh, wow. I've got quite a few of those. I'll tell you where I'd like to start. I'd like to start as a 14-year-old when I first started work, and the first piece of advice I was ever given, and I was given it by a chap long since departed now called Arthur Ells, who was then in his mid-60s and just about to retire, and he was a charge hand in a factory that I worked in, a paper mill actually. And on my first day at work, he took me aside and he said, I'm going to tell you a couple of things. I have milky tea with 2 sugars, and you warm the pot first, and if you get that wrong, I'll kill you. He said, and second, what I advise you to do is learn your own job and then learn somebody else's. And that second piece of advice really stood me in great stead, and I've used that through the rest of my career and to some extent life, that says first learn what you're doing, then learn what somebody else is doing, and I've always found that useful. And even in...
Have you had an example, Paul, of where that's been really effective?
Yeah, right back up front. I worked in a paper mill called Turkey Mill, unbelievably, but the company was called Hollingsworth.
This is in Deepest Kent, is it?
It's in Deepest Kent, and although I'm a Londoner, I kind of grew up in Kent because my parents moved there when I was 5 or 6. And at that time, in the area that we lived, there were 9 or 10 paper mills, and it was a centre of paper manufacturing for the UK. And Hollingsworth, the mill I worked in, was the oldest still running paper mill in the country. And basically, at one point, this is how old they are, they used to make the paper for currency in the UK. Mm-hmm. But they made very special paper with heavy-duty watermarks in it. And a device that puts a watermark in paper in the old way is a thing called a dandy roll. I'll tell you that because it becomes relevant in a moment. My job, when I first started at the paper mill, at the interview for my job, it consisted of 4 of us that had applied for the job who were stood against the wall and measured, and I was the shortest, so I got the job. Yeah. Okay. And the reason for that is the paper mill was Victorian, and it was steam driven, coal powered.
Were you applying for the job during the Victorian times?
Probably, yeah, not long after, actually. I'll tell you when it was. It was 1969, 1970.
Okay.
Yeah. 1970, June 1970. And because it was coal-fired, starting and stopping the mill was a huge drain on its resources. Once you shut the mill down, you had to let it all go cold, so you couldn't fire it up again for three weeks or so. So the worst thing that could ever happen to the paper mill was closing down for a period of time. My job was to crawl in the machine. People never believe this now because it would just not happen. But my job was to crawl in the machinery while it was running and grease the bearings to make sure it didn't seize up.
It's like a workhouse scenario, isn't it?
It was a workhouse. It was exactly a workhouse.
And this was when you were 14?
I was 14, yeah. I was just coming... Basically, my birthday's in August. I was 15 in the August, which is when you could leave school at that time. A few months before the end of term, I'd had one of my ongoing rows with the headmaster at the school, who said to me, do you know what, I think you ought to leave. And I went, do you know what, I think I will. And that was kind of what happened. And I actually left school and walked out the gate when they were putting up a vacancy sign in the paper mill. So I walked out of the school gate into Turkey Mill, got the job and started the following Monday on the night shift, would you believe?
Wow.
Greasing bearings and smashing water rats, actually, and I got a bonus per water rat, but we won't go into that. That was my first job, and Arthur, the charge hand, told me this piece of advice, which is, first of all, learn your own job and then learn somebody else's. And I'm quite a curious kind of person as well. I'm one of those annoying people who always go, how'd you do that? Why'd you do that? How does that work then? Tell me about that. Why do you know
That's the curiosity of the entrepreneur, isn't it?
Absolutely, And I've always been curious about things. And I've always been willing to ask, why do you do that? And one of the things I also learned very early on is if you ask someone how they do what they do, they're very happy to tell you normally, because it's a sense of pride. Well, I know something you don't, let me tell you. Anyway, we had there were two chaps, one on each shift, that are called dryermen. And their job is to put the watermark in the paper. So they're in charge of the dandy roll room, putting the watermark in the paper and ensuring the paper conforms to the quality that it's supposed to conform to. Okay? About 4 or 5 months into my tenure, by now I'm 15, into my tenure as a greaser and rat smasher, I'm at work one evening, and the foreman comes in and says, we've got a massive problem. What's the matter? The evening shift dryerman has quit, and the day shift dryerman, who's already done a 12-hour shift, is refusing to come to work. Therefore, we're going to have to shut the machines down, and that's going to cause us enormous grief. So I said, well, why have we got to shut the machines down? And they all said, because we don't have a dryerman. And I said, I can do it. And what had happened is, a few weeks before, I'd been trawling around watching this guy do what he did, and I'd asked him loads of questions, and I was also fascinated by these dandy rolls, and I was quite familiar with them. I'd spend my breaks looking at all the old dandy rolls and things like that, that did the watermarks. And I'd said to the guy one day, so how do you do what you do then? How does the watermark actually work? And he explained the mechanics of how the watermark was put in the paper. But the thing he showed me is how to ensure that the quality of paper, once you'd made it, was the right quality. And basically what he'd do while the machine was running, he'd rip a piece of paper about half a metre square out of the production. He'd fold it into a quarter, he would weigh it, and then he would suck it. Okay? Until it burst.
Literally suck it?
He would literally suck it. And I go, what'd you do that for? He said, well, we've got a machine that does it, but it's not as accurate as doing it yourself. He said, because you can taste the alum in the paper. And and I'm going, you're winding me. Because you can imagine what the scenario was at a place like that. There was a lot of what would now be called workplace bullying and wind-ups and stuff like that. You know, like the first night I made a cup of tea, somebody had nailed the teapot to the table and that kind of thing. But so I was wary that he was winding me up, but I had actually seen him doing this before. So I asked him loads of questions, and to be fair, he showed me and he said, you know, try it, suck it. What do you taste? It's horrible. Yeah, but that's alum. It's important, you know, and he was explaining and da-da-da. So most nights he'd show me how to do this. Anyway, back to the time where we no longer had a dryerman and everybody was panicking, and I said, I can do that. And the night shift foreman said, don't be ridiculous, you're a child. Of course you can't do that. So I ripped a piece of paper off the machine, and I weighed it, and I said, that is not up to spec. And that quite often happened. You had to adjust the flow of things. I said, that's too heavy. And I went, I bet if I taste it, it's got too much alum in it. And I've gone like that, too much alum. And they've all looked at me, and they go, really? No, really? And Arthur, the guy that gave me the advice, he went, he knows what he's doing. He's been talking to Brian as a dryman. He knows what he's doing. So I said, you are now the dryman. And they gave me the job on the spot, and I did that until I stopped doing it. And,
until a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I was there about 18 months, and then again, you won't remember this far back. The miners went on strike for a 43% pay rise they wanted. 1971. Of course, the mill couldn't operate without coal, and it went bust, and we were all made redundant. So,
well, people forget, talking about kind of different generations, that Kent was a serious coal.
Yeah, it was a very big coal provider. Yeah,
do they have any more down there now? Is it all closed down?
There are no working mines any longer. Betshanger, which is the biggest, is now a park. A leisure park. Snowdon is a business park, and there was another colliery there as well.
People always think that it was Wales or a northern thing. But
no, it's big. It's big coal fields.
Yeah.
The two biggest industries in Kent when I was growing up, well, the three actually, was the coal fields, but they weren't in my part of Kent. They were all down on the coast around Dover.
Right.
The biggest industries where I was in mid-Kent was the paper industry and Chatham dockyards, which was the big naval dockyards.
Of course. Yeah, very historic.
Yeah. And when I was at school, career planning went, you're going to join the army or you're going to work in the dockyards, which is it?
I don't want to sound like Paul Merton, but I went to a comprehensive that was pretty much the same. I remember my careers guide, which lasted about 5 minutes. But just interesting, actually, because you've become a kind of serial entrepreneur. You've got your hand in various businesses, I think, haven't you? And therefore you're obviously employing lots of people. Do you look at youngsters coming through and you think, do you shape your impressions of them and the way you used to approach it at that age?
Yes, I do. But I'm also wary that things change and life is very different now. And funnily enough, I bumped into one of my youngest son's school friends on the way up here this morning, who was just on his way to do an internship. He's still at university at Durham, but he's on his way to do an internship. And I was chatting to him. He's reading media, and he's just going to Talksport to do an internship at a radio station.
Fantastic, yeah.
But he got a couple of gigs writing sports reports for some newspapers, and I'd read a couple of them, and I said, "Are you still doing that?" And he went, "Oh no." And I said, "Oh, why?" He said, "Well, basically, I gave that idea up." He said, "Because in order to start doing that kind of thing, I'd have to start on some little local paper, and that's tacky." And my first reaction was, "No, we all start at the bottom." But of course, it isn't necessarily that way any longer. But it does worry me sometimes that we do have a bit of a lack of work ethic, and one of the reasons so many young people struggle to find work is that, and I don't blame them entirely because we've sold them this, is their expectations are much larger than what they should be as a starting point. You know, especially people that have got degrees that have been told the reason we're charging you a fortune to get your degree is when you've got
lots of money.
You're going to earn lots of money, and that is just not true. You know, still, unfortunately, when you come into the world of work, you start at the bottom because you have very little practical, real experience. You quickly get it, but the one thing I don't see is enough youngsters being willing to start at the bottom and learn, and that's the biggest drawback.
And one of your companies is a recruitment.
Yeah, that's my main business.
Are there main issues there for because clearly for an employer of a smaller business, recruitment is so critical. We're at Lawyer Fair, a tiny operation, so everybody we employ has to work.
Yeah, absolutely.
And do you find that there's a gap of expectation between employer and employees?
Yeah. I can wax lyrical on this for ages, and funnily enough, I was just at a big event on Friday with the Federation of Small Business when we were talking about the skills gap, and we had some people from politics, some people from education, and a load of businesses, and some very frightening results if you're in education or government. At the moment, I run a company called Jobs in Kent. I also run Jobs in Essex, Jobs in Surrey, Jobs in Sussex, and a few others. They are recruitment portals. I'm not an employment agent. We advertise jobs for employers.
Right.
But I've been doing that for a long time, and I know a lot about the employment marketplace, and it's one of my areas of expertise. And I also participate on a regional board of the Bank of England as a specialist in employment in the South East region. And we have so many jobs. It's unbelievable. We are really struggling for people. Okay, and the first problem is convincing politicians that unemployment bears no relationship to the amount of jobs. And one of the things we were doing last week, which really shook the politicians came along and announced that they were going to do something in a particular region of Kent, and the reason they were doing it is because it would generate loads and loads of jobs. And they kind of went, now give us a big clap, and we all went, oh, for crying out loud. And they went, what? And we said, we don't want any more jobs, thank you. We can't fill the ones we've got. And they all stood there looking stunned. What do you mean? You know, in this region of Kent, there are 2,000 unemployed people. Yeah, there'll always be 2,000 unemployed people because they're unemployable. Yeah, it's as simple as that. It's not because there's a shortage of jobs. Yeah. And the problem we have in this country is we have massive skill shortages. But now we have to look at what skills are. The Federation of Small Business, Kent and Medway, just commissioned a survey done by Professor Vic Newman at Greenwich University, and the findings from that are frightening if you happen to work in government or education. Yeah, because the vast majority of new jobs are generated by small businesses with less than 50 employees, and the figures were these. 26% of businesses were interested in qualifications. Just 26%. Yeah. So 74% weren't.
Yeah.
And less than 4% of those were interested in the level of qualification you had.
Wow.
Okay. Everybody said we couldn't care less about skills. GCSEs and A-levels are ridiculous. They are meaningless, and we are not remotely interested in what you got, or even if you got them. Nonsense. What we want is a work ethic, an attitude to work, and a willingness to engage, and we will train in any way that you want. Now, the problem is that one of the big things that small businesses have adopted is apprenticeships, and they've adopted apprenticeships in a big way. And on Jobs in Kent, we're advertising between 400 and 600 apprenticeships a month in Kent, and filling less than 10% of them.
Wow, that's incredible.
Just can't get people.
Yeah.
So there's big problems in the employment market that are structural. Education, in my humble opinion, isn't fit for purpose any longer. The politicians have messed around with it and messed around with it and messed around with it. And what I think they need to do is go right back to basics and say, what is the purpose of what we're doing here? You know, this desire to shove everybody into a third-rate university has backfired big time, in my opinion. And I've got lots of theories if you ever want to hear them, you know. But
I'm going to get you to have a part two of this.
But you know, it's basically what I was saying to you about my early career, is that as a 14 or 15-year-old coming into the workplace, you're quite malleable still because you're still a child.
Yeah.
So the old guys that have been there a long time can manipulate how you think, what you do, and what you do. Because we moved the school leaving age to 18, and this primarily affects boys rather than girls, by the time 18-year-old boys are coming into the workplace, they're men. And most of them are bigger than you as well. So that when they arrive in the workplace, you can't do what Arthur Ells did to me, which is say, make the tea, do this, because they'll just turn around and go, make it yourself. And because they've lost that malleability, they expect to arrive into a fully functioning job where they can, you know, demand their own salary. It ain't going to happen. I think we've got vocational training all wrong.
Well, listen, I agree with a lot of what you say there, and certainly from my perspective, I mean, I never look at a CV for its qualifications. I never look at qualifications. And in fact, to some extent, I don't even look at the CV first. I look at the person first.
Yeah.
You can train a great person. Yeah. You can't do much with a guy with a bad attitude.
Absolutely. It's vanishingly simple. I had a huge row about this with the four head teachers that were there. And we were talking about this, and I said, because they were moaning that their pupils send in CVs to get work experience and they don't get a reply. And I said, yeah, okay, but have you ever stopped to think why? Have you ever analysed what is actually going on? You're just making assumptions. You're assuming that they've sent them in and nobody's got an opening, so they've just ignored you. How about the fact that that what they sent in is such a load of rubbish that they can't even be bothered to reply to it. And I said, and I don't mean that nastily, I mean, because I've seen a lot of these, that you're not doing what people need. I said, you've got as careers teachers, you're obsessed with personal statements. I'm here to tell you that businesses hate personal statements with a vengeance because they all say exactly the same.
So you're talking about the intro to a CV or something?
Yeah. So because youngsters don't have any experience to put on their CV, the CV becomes focused on their qualifications and their personal statement. And every personal statement's the same. I'm a great team player that's capable of working on my own. I'm hard-working, loyal, unbelievable. They all say exactly the same.
You're absolutely right.
I said, what I want to see is a piece of research that says, hi, my name is Paul. I've just looked at lawyerfair.co.uk. What an interesting concept. I'd really like to find out more about working on
Paul, I couldn't agree. I mean, it frustrates the hell out of me when we get these CVs that have this generic intro. And I'll email them back, because I actually do always reply. I know when I used to apply for things, it frustrates the hell out of me. And I'll often go back and say, that's lovely, but tell me why you're interested in this job. What is it about this company? Very rarely do I get a response.
Absolutely. And those that do that will get work.
It's absolutely,
I'll give you an example. My youngest son, bless him, he academically not very good, and that's putting it mildly. But the thing about Stuart is he's very emotionally intelligent. He's very aware, and he's very dynamic. So he wanted work experience, and he wanted work experience working on a very well-known television program. So what he did was he Googled the production company. He found out the names of the owners and senior management of the production company. He looked them up on LinkedIn. He found out which, if any of them, went to the same school as him. He then found one that had been to the same school he went to, and he's at the Bristol Old Vic Theatre School at the moment, and had also been there. He then emailed him and went, hi, my name's Stu. We both went to King's, we both went to Bristol Old Vic. You know what it's like. I'm having to find work experience. I'd really like to work on your television programme. When would you like me to start?
And when is he starting?
He started, the guy right back said, Monday, thank you.
That's brilliant. That's a great story. Because the other thing about that kind of story, and I think that's a really brilliant story, if I got anybody applying to Lawyer Fair with that kind of nous, I would probably employ them without meeting them. But the other point is that the social media footprint of individuals and companies now is so extensive.
Excellent.
It does not take rocket scientists to work out what's the angle here. Listen, we are going to have to wrap this up because we have a little thing on our Business and Beef podcast called Henry's Beef of the Week. Henry is not here today. He's in Austria for some reason. So I'm going to take over because he tends to dominate the Beef of the Week with things about pensions, which frankly is very dull. So we're going to come to that in a second. And it's actually going to link in, and there's been no preparation, listeners, on this. It's going to link in with something you've been saying. One little question, I've just been looking down this extensive CV of your own. Nice personal statement there, Paul. Lean Startup Incubator, what's that relating to?
Basically, I own a thing in Canterbury called Fruitworks. And Fruitworks is a community hot desking space. And one of the things we did when we first started that is we had a business startup incubator there. And the way that it works is that once a year we have an open day. And anyone can come along and do a preliminary pitch for their business idea. Okay. And we get quite a large audience, and then it's a bit Dragon's Den-y, really. And what we do is we say to the audience, out of all the people you've heard, they all do a quick 2-minute pitch. Out of all the people that you've heard do a quick 2-minute pitch, which 6 of those people would you like to do a fuller pitch today? So the audience vote on that, and then the 6 winners, for want of a better way, come and do a much bigger pitch. And then myself and 2 or 3 of my colleagues that are all angel investors will then work with at least one of those organisations to mentor and find them some funding.
How often does that happen?
It happens once a year, allegedly.
Is there a date coming up at all?
There will be soon, but we haven't announced it.
Right.
Actually, what happened though, last year, the winner, for want of a better word, we actually invested in ourselves, and then due to one thing and another, we've ended up running the company. And the original entrepreneur now is starting up another business in Los Angeles.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Which is great.
Yeah.
So not only did we mentor it, we ended up with the business and running it.
Can I ask you a question? Because there is a common theme in much of what you've been talking about today. Yeah. Do you get ideas where you think I could do that better and don't do it?
Oh yeah. You asked me about things that didn't go so well.
Yeah.
Very, very early on in my career, working for myself 20 odd years ago, I invested in a business because a friend of mine came to me with a really good business idea, and I thought, that sounds good, I'll invest some money in it. I didn't set out to be an angel investor or anything like that. It just sounded like a good idea at the time. And it worked really well. And I thought, oh, that's easy. Give someone a little bit of money, they give you more back.
There you go.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I then registered with a company you may have heard of called Beer and Partners. Beer and Partners are, I don't know how you describe them, they're a capital raising organisation for small and medium-sized businesses. And I registered as a potential investor, and they would send me ideas through which I could either go with or not. And one day they sent me through an idea, and they said, you really, really, really must get into this because it's right up your street. It's a technology orientated thing. And they sent me the plan, and I actually went to see them. And this particular organisation wanted £100,000 for 10% of their business. And I sat there and I looked at it and I went, right, explain this to me. They said, we're going to make an electronic device, and the electronic device will fit in your car, and it will help you get to where you want to get to, and it will cost about £3,000. I went, that's a stupid idea. That is an utterly stupid idea. And they went, well, why? I said, you want me to pay £3,000 for a device attached to my car to tell me how to get where I want to get to, and I can buy a map for £5? Really? No. And that's why I don't earn 10% of TomTom.
Well, I'm sure we all have very similar stories, but you mustn't lie awake at night thinking about these things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Much other success has come.
Brace yourself. It's Henry's Beef of the Week.
As I say, we have Henry's Beef of the Week, and this is going to be my Beef of the Week, and this does cross over in what you've been saying. Now, there are elements of what you were talking about, I think, or alluding to, in terms of how maybe some young people expect to go straight to the top, and I think there's a celebrity culture and an issue there, the X Factor culture. So I thought about, what do I want my Beef of the Week to be? I'm only going to get one slot here. Okay, but take a look. So there was a whole kind of, I had a full list of them, and I came down to this. This really gets my goat. Keynote speakers. Okay, not keynote speakers per se, and they're fine. Bit of vanity publishing gets you on a keynote speaker thing, that's great. But celebrity keynote speakers, particularly celebrities from The Apprentice. So I went to an event recently where two of the keynote speakers had finished, I think, respectively, 7th and 11th in that particular year's Apprentice. Now, I got to tell you, I actually quite enjoy The Apprentice for what it is, which is a bit of a comedy show. The missus and I snuggle up every Thursday night in bed. It used to be 9.5 weeks. That shows my age. But now it's The Apprentice, and we quite enjoy the theatre of it. But I don't want to go to an event and be teased into that event by the fact that the keynote speaker finished 11th in The Apprentice. I'm sorry. Event organisers, you know who you are. Tone down this celebrity nonsense with keynote speakers. Have people on that stage who've done it, seen it, and are genuinely telling people about their real experience. And that, my friend, is a Beef of the Week.
Absolutely.
I actually kept Paul Andrews mute for 35 seconds.
Absolutely, yeah.
Paul,
I totally agree with you as well.
But he was nodding in agreement. Listen, thank you so much for your time on this. It's been really absorbing. I've really enjoyed it, and it's been great to get on the other side and allow you a bit of license to chat online or on the podcast as it is here. Paul Andrews, thanks a lot. That was Business and Beef. I'm Andrew Weaver. See you next time.
Thanks for listening. You can subscribe for future shows via iTunes or visit us on Twitter at Business and Beef.
It's business.